Ferrari didn't do so bad in the free trials at Jeddah. In fact, it convinced Charles Leclerc, who finished 4th in the FP2, 13th Hamilton, who instead found himself in more difficulty. But there is also a technical reason, and we saw a Ferrari that brought updates to the rear, to the beam wing that we are going to see in the course of the video. We also have to talk about the performances of the McLarens, which were very fast, they were very strong, and we also have to talk about their updates that they brought, because they brought something new as well. We have to talk about Verstappen. We also have to talk about the accident of Tsunoda that happened in the FP2, which then caused the red flag. And why did Tsunoda have that accident? What are the problems at the moment with Red Bull and also with Mercedes, which did not go as well as many expected before these free trials in Jeddah? Having said that, let's start right away. First, I remind you to leave a like, to subscribe, activate notifications so you don't miss any video that's here on the channel. We will analyze the highlights of the free trials, and then we will also look at the telemetry. Analyzing the times. Having said that, I want to make a brief reflection on Ferrari because we said it didn't go so bad. In my opinion, Ferrari has proven to be the second force at this moment in Jeddah. We also saw in the free trials 1, 3rd with Leclerc, and 8th Hamilton. Hamilton is having a lot more trouble than Leclerc on this track. And many are wondering why. Well, there is a problem with rear instability. In fact, we have seen a Ferrari that has brought a rear wing more unloaded, in the sense it is not a new rear wing, but they have modified the current one to make it more unloaded. And it also brought a new different beam wing to try to maximize the aerodynamic efficiency of the red at the expense, of course, of the aerodynamic load, but especially at the expense of the balance between front and rear. And he himself also said it, Hamilton, in the interviews before the free trial, so he was already aware of this. Also, looking at the past races where he said that Leclerc has gotten better used to oversteering driving with a pointed front and maybe has a very unstable rear. That has no grip, almost, while Hamilton also prefers oversteering driving, but he needs a bit more grip at the rear, something he doesn't have, especially here in Jeddah with the rare Ferrari updates, and this leads him to drive a bit more to the limit. He struggles more to go fast in the fast corners, to have that courage that Hamilton is not lacking. However, he can't feel that feeling at the rear that doesn't allow him to push further. And this is the main difference between Leclerc and Hamilton at this moment. We saw it on the different tracks at the beginning of the season, where Leclerc was clearly faster than Hamilton in the fast corners, and it was even more noticeable. Here in Jeddah, this difference, because Hamilton needs to feel the rear more stable compared to Leclerc. And we have seen this not only this year in Ferrari with Hamilton, but also in the past years we have seen with the ground effect cars at Hamilton, who struggled to get used to and adapt to Jeddah as a track precisely because he needs to feel the rear more loaded compared to others. And Jeddah is notoriously a track where you need to have a car more unloaded at the rear, more efficient, where it counts a lot to have a pointed front to be precise in insertion in the various fast corners. If they have curves that are all faced above 124 miles per hour, something really crazy, and to the walls attached, then you have to have a lot of precision in driving, a lot of courage, and you can also risk losing the rear, but you have to try to manage it in some way, and Hamilton is struggling on this. So let's see what Ferrari actually brought new, what instead brought McLaren to see the differences between the two. Then these are the updates of Ferrari, the news that it brought, let's say, this weekend. So we saw a rear wing with the reduction of the drag of the rear wing. So they shortened the chord of the rear flap and therefore reduced the size of the rear flap to try to adapt to the circuit of Jeddah. So improve the aerodynamic efficiency, and this is something that all teams obviously do to adapt the rear wing to the different tracks. They also modified not only the rear wing but also the beam wing, which is a single element, and the beam wing also serves there to try to make the car more efficient at the rear, less drag, and therefore means more top speed, and this is fundamental. In fact, there are updates that are made on the most unloaded tracks. So Ferrari also did here a Jeddah, while here we see the updates of McLaren that made a great performance after we also go to see the times. But I want to talk first about the differences. McLaren brought new solutions to the diffuser that modified the shape of the diffuser, and we have to see it together also with the images, and also modified the air intake of the brakes at the rear. So it also modified that area, which is fundamental for the air that actually arrives then at the diffuser itself. So these are all changes that are needed to increase the load at the rear, but without increasing the drag of the single-seater, and therefore to try to maintain the aerodynamic efficiency that is fundamental to Jed. We said it, but at the same time, by also modifying the shape of the diffuser, you also increase the vertical thrust that the rear has. So these are the changes of McLaren. Going to see in detail, I also show you the part of McLaren of the rear wing. Here it is. This is the rear wing of McLaren with the part then also modified of the diffuser in this case, and therefore also then the air intake of the brakes at the rear. So this is the rear part of McLaren. Let's go see though the times, and let's see where McLaren actually makes the difference that started off strong this weekend. It really started strong and made a difference mainly. Now I show you the times in this case. Let's see, I put on the other side. These are the free practice 2 that I remember have the time and the weather that will also be in qualifying in race. So they are the most reliable, the free practice 2. The free practice 1 serves a bit to rubberize the track, to clean it also because the Jeddah track is dirty and presents sand on the asphalt. So the free practice 2 are the most reliable also to see the times. We saw the 1.2 8.2 made by Norris. Then behind him at 163 thousandths in second position, we have Piastri, so 1.2 McLaren, which confirms a bit the trend of this season with a very strong McLaren at 280 thousandths. We have Verstappen, and at 482 thousandths, we have Leclerc fourth. As I told you, the first Ferrari fourth with Leclerc. But be careful that this time of Leclerc is there in front, but it is not so reliable in the sense that it could have been even better. In my opinion, he could have maybe even placed third since he made several attempts before actually doing the good lap with a slightly more worn tire. So Leclerc, he made 2 attempts in which he aborted the lap because he made a mistake in the first chicane right in the first 2 turns. And so after he returned to the pits, he made a modification to the front wing to have more grip on the front because he didn't feel enough feeling. McLaren's opponents had a weak first sector compared to them, and that's where they made up significant time, and then redid the lap. However, with a slightly more worn tire. And so this explains why Leclerc is fourth. He could have done a little better. Then fifth Sainz, sixth Tsunoda, who is also the author of the incident we saw at the end of FP2, which we will look at together later. And then we come a bit to the sore point if we want, which is Mercedes. That did not do as well as they expected. In fact, 7th Russell and 11th Antonelli in between. We have a bit of drivers. We saw Gasly 8th, who, among other things in the FPU, did not go very strong, also thanks to a higher engine mapping compared to the opponents. And we also saw Hülkenberg 9th, 10th Albon, and so on, all the others. 13th Hamilton, guys. It must be said that Hamilton did not adapt at all to this track. And with this Ferrari especially, we also saw him in the past years struggling a lot, especially with new tire, because then in the race, he goes to recover in Jeddah. We had seen it with the comparison Russell-Hamilton in Mercedes the past years, and it is also seen this year in the comparison with Leclerc. The difference is abyssal, and this is seen just as the times also on the lap, especially indeed with new tire. He struggles a lot. So I want to show you first a graphic which shows us the updated rear wing of Ferrari. So I show the old one from Jeddah, the new one from Jeddah. The old one from Jeddah and the new one from Jeddah that has changed. Let's say the one above is the old one and the one below is the new one. You see that it is cut, that the rear wing is thinner here in Jeddah. Then let's go see instead another thing. First, the telemetry to see the comparison with the opponents, and then we also go to see the lap times. On the race pace, I first make a general comment on how we have seen the various teams before going to see the telemetry that shows us everything in detail. So where does the difference come from? McLaren mainly in turn 1 and 2, which are the slowest turns of the circuit with a very unloaded car. So this is where McLaren makes the difference. Generating a lot of load from the bottom, manages to be faster than the opponents in progress and also in changes of direction. Like in this initial chicane, despite having an unloaded car, the opponent's going to sacrifice a lot the outside of the car, having a very efficient car. Okay, so going to use very unloaded wings, going to use very unloaded beam wings. They obviously lose car balance and therefore also grip on the tires in slow corners, because they aim to go faster in the fast part of the circuit, so in the second and third sector of Jeddah. In this case, however, McLaren manages to go very fast in the first sector, especially in the first 3 corners where they increase the gap on the opponents, even gaining 2 or 3 tenths on the opponents on I think Verstappen and in Leclerc, who are the two main rivals of McLaren at this moment. We have seen many drivers touch the wall coming out of turn 13, so coming out of the last turn, not turn 13 coming out of the last turn. We also saw the accident of Tsunoda that happened at the last turn on exit, but due to a contact made inside the last turn. And this is a fairly important point. Among other things, they have also widened the last turn, but it is a difficult turn to make because it pushes a lot towards the outside, and so you have to try to manage the exit as well and not go too much to the limit because be careful. You touch the wall and you also risk having an accident. This will be important in qualifying to try to be careful on this curve here. And having said that, let's go see the telemetry now so we see everything together. And then we go to see the race pace. So this is the telemetry of the free practice one that helps us understand the difference between Verstappen and Norris and Leclerc. In the free practice one, among other things, McLaren was also quite limited. It had that clipping on the straights, so it gave to lose quite compared to the opponents. However, we can already see here where McLaren makes the difference. McLaren makes the difference in these curves, guys. Look here. Look at the delta time below. That is clearly seen. I'll leave it to you for a while. Both Verstappen and Leclerc enter very strong at the entrance of curve 1. But the problem is that they can't stop the car in time. And McLaren manages to have a better traction than both. Look also at the speed in progress. If we go a little earlier, it is seen, look here, the part of exit increases. With the increase of the speed, we see that McLaren has an incredible speed at the exit of the curve. Goes about 10-15 km/h faster compared to Ferrari and Red Bull. So this is the real advantage of McLaren. It manages to have more traction on exit despite a very light car. And this is seen not only here, but also going forward in the first sector. We see that in the most driven part of the first sector, McLaren still manages to have more speed compared to the opponents and therefore manages to bring its initial advantage of 0.000ths to an advantage of 0.2 compared to Ferrari and 0.4 compared to Red Bull. So you see that really a lot. You see it in the delta time. You see so much that the difference is huge in the first sector, and they are literally 3 curves, but they are the most important curves if we want off Jeddah, because they are the curves where you need to have more traction on exit, in addition to curve 13, which is still a curve where you need to have a good progress if we want, which is that hairpin that goes back the farthest part from the straight. Having said this, going forward with the lap, we see that McLaren is very balanced even in the fast curves. However, it does not gain much if we arrive at the middle of the first sector with more than 0.4 compared to Red Bull and more than 0.2 compared to Ferrari. Going forward, in the end, the gap remains almost identical. In fact, Ferrari in the F1 was recovering a lot also in terms of top speed, because if we look at the top speed, we see that both Red Bull and Ferrari make a difference compared to McLaren, which, if we want, the only weak point of McLaren at this moment is precisely the top speed, which is not on par with the opponents, which, however, counts a lot in Jeddah anyway, because very high speeds are reached, but by gaining so much in the first sector, it does not make so much of a negative difference. For McLaren, I want to show you also, obviously, the times of the race pace simulation. So in the race pace simulation, we saw Norris mount medium tire, 11 laps he did, and another medium tire, 15 laps, while Piazza did 13 laps. With medium tire and 8 laps with soft tire, Verstappen did 6 laps with medium tire and 6 laps with soft tire. While Leclerc, you see, did many more stints, if we want, compared to the opponents, because he tried several times to do the lap with soft tire, not succeeding. That is, having to abort the attempt every time. And so then in the end, he did his long run with 11 laps with medium tire and 15 with medium tire, another stint. So the difference, let's say, in lap times is that we saw a Ferrari running on 34, 34 and a half, 34 high, while McLaren was running on 34 low. 33 high was running about 0.5, 0.6 difference between the two. Verstappen had started with times similar to those of Ferrari, then went a bit higher on lap times. So if we want to see now on pace, it seems to me a McLaren first force, then Ferrari, then Red Bull, and then Mercedes. So if we want the positive side, is that Ferrari finds itself as the second force. The negative side is that to date, McLaren seems to be much superior to the opponents. Even here in Jeddah, when everyone expected a McLaren maybe a little more downsized to the levels of the opponents, but this is what we have seen so far. Never say never. We know that Leclerc anyway did not put together his best time, in the sense that he could do even better, in my opinion, in his attempt in the dry lap. But anyway, Ferrari at this moment is not badly placed compared to the opponents, especially compared to Red Bull, and Mercedes seems to be superior. I'll also show you a close-up of the tire of Leclerc. This is Leclerc's tire after doing the stint with medium tire in the race pace, and it doesn't show so much graining. In fact, it seems to be quite well placed, and this is a bit the only limit of Jeddah if we want is the graining on the front tires, and the graining we know that it is created due to a difference in temperature between the ideal temperature of the tire and the actual temperature. Present, and when there is this temperature difference, especially when there is, let's say, a decay of the temperature, so a lowering of the tire temperature, graining is also generated. In this case, it is not, but it has been marked on the Ferrari. This is also good for the race pace, and in general, all the teams have not accused a lot of graining, but it should also be seen in terms of race pace. Also pay attention to the strategies, because we will probably see some teams that might also choose the soft tire at the start. The best strategy would be made hard. However, they could also opt for soft hard, given many teams that have also tried the soft tire in both Free Practice 1 and FP2. So pay attention a bit to all this. And let's also see now the race pace of the various teams. Let's see a bit of the difference. First, I want to show you also the difference between Verstappen, Norris, Leclerc, and Russell. Let's go see it on the dry lap in FP2, and then let's also see the race pace. This difference between, and I put here on the right, yes, in fact I put here on the left, this difference between the various drivers in the dry lap. Remember that Leclerc had a slightly more worn tire that is not worn but still with some more lap compared to the others, and we see that the real difference of McLaren, of Norris in this case, is made in the first sector. Look here, the delta, as I also showed you in Free Practice 1, the same thing also happened in FP2 under very different conditions, because Free Practice 1 took place with a hotter and also dirtier, less rubberized track. The LFP2 was a more rubberized track, less dirty and with lower asphalt temperature, which is then what we will also see in qualifying and race. But still, in the first sector, McLaren made the difference and managed to gain a lot on the opponents. In this case, coming out of the first sector with curve 1, 2, 3, 4, we arrive here with a gap towards Verstappen of 140 thousandths, towards Leclerc of 321 thousandths, towards Mercedes of 138 thousandths. So Ferrari, among all the teams, is the one that suffers the most in the first sector. Then, going on with the lap, Ferrari remains quite constant with the delta towards McLaren and only loses a tenth, if we want, at the end of the lap, while Mercedes goes to lose much more, even in the fast part, continues to lose and cannot be at the same level in the fast curves towards McLaren. On the contrary, Verstappen manages to recover in the central sector, the most driven towards Norris, and then loses a bit both in curve 13, but then going on also in the second part of the circuit, especially in the third sector, he goes to lose something, but especially in curve 13, he goes to lose a lot, Verstappen. And so this shows us a bit the trend of the lap in relation to the various teams. McLaren makes the difference, I repeat. In the first sector where it goes stronger, even going to see the use of gears, we see that it still uses one gear less, manages to have more traction, more grip, and still not skid, make the changes of direction faster, has a better management. It is also seen from the onboard. It is really on a track McLaren, especially in the first sector and in curve 1-2 where it makes the difference. Let's go to see also the race pace that we are going to analyze a bit the differences between the various teams. So let's see the times. In this case, Verstappen and Norris. I took Verstappen, did 134.9, 134.8, 134.7, 134.7, 141 lap, a bit higher, 1.34.9, 1.35.2, so on the high 34. 35 low. While if we go to see Norris, he had just started, then there was Tsunoda's accident. 35.0 and then 38.2. Let's also take Piastri so we can make the comparison even with the other McLaren, which, if I'm not mistaken, had started the simulation earlier. In fact, 33.8, 33.7, 34.1, 34.0. You see that it's much faster. It even runs 7/8 tenths faster than Verstappen with the same tire. Let's now take Leclerc, and I don't remember if Leclerc had done many laps. In the race pace simulation, He did 2 laps, 34.7 and 34.6, so faster than Verstappen in terms of attack times, but by 2.3. However, not at the level of McLaren, for what I was telling you that Ferrari is better than Red Bull at this moment on the race pace. In qualifying, they played instead. If we also take Hamilton and we also make the comparison, Hamilton is 35.3 attack time and 35.4, so slower times than Hamilton. There is a real abyssal difference between the two in this Grand Prix, with Hamilton, who is really struggling a lot. And let's also make a comparison between Leclerc and Hamilton on the dry lap. So we also see the difference between the two, where Hamilton actually loses. Then making the comparison between the two, we see that Hamilton loses at higher speed on the straight compared to Leclerc. So probably it is a choice, or a more aggressive configuration of the hybrid engine. Probably also a different aerodynamic choice. However, going forward, we see that he loses in the fast curves, where you need to have more stability of the rear. A difference of even 6.21 miles per hour. 5.6 miles per hour difference between the two, and loses a lot, therefore, in the first sector, where the Leclerc makes the difference on Hamilton, but mainly loses in all the curves. We also see here he loses something in progress. He doesn't have the same feeling, and especially on exit. Hamilton loses a lot, because if we also see here zoomed in, we see exactly the part on exit where Hamilton loses more compared to Leclerc. Maybe he enters quite similar in entry, they are quite similar in speed. But in progress on exit, he struggles a lot. Hamilton not having a real feeling with the rear. You don't feel like pushing so much to the limit. You don't have that courage that you need to bring so much speed in progress also, because we have seen several corrections. However, of the English driver, because he still doesn't feel comfortable with the rear of the SF-25. This is the reality of the facts. First, let's go see Tsunoda. The accident he had in LFP2, because it was a pretty serious accident among other things. Until that moment, Tsunoda was doing very well. In my opinion, he was doing a great performance. The free practice was at the level of Max, a 10th difference between the two, and then he made this mistake. Let's move on. Let's see how he prepares the curve. He closes a lot towards the inside and touches the wall with the left front. Look at the contact. Now I let it go. You see, the contact was light. It wasn't even a heavy contact. But here we have a wall. Okay, rigid. And even a slight contact with a very rigid, very hard surface is enough. And so he then lost, let's say he broke the suspension arm. So he lost direction and went straight into the barriers. Let's see here. It's a mistake. Yes, quite serious anyway, because a top team driver can't afford to make such a mistake. You can expect it from a mid-ranking driver. It must also be said that Tsunoda doesn't drive this Red Bull very much. It's a shame, because until now he's been doing well. I hope it doesn't affect his result in this Grand Prix and his feeling with Red Bull RB21, especially since he was doing well until now. So this is an incident with Tsunoda that then caused the red flag, and we also saw another very important problem that I'll show you here with this onboard of Albon, who is in front of Hamilton. Watch out, guys, for the various impeding. Look here. Here Albon was in his lap. He finds himself in front of Hamilton. He has to turn immediately at the last, and this was a very important theme. Be careful in the qualifications, this thing here, because it could also cause penalties on the grid. So the relationship between the track engineer, the driver, in this case with Hamilton, Riccardo Adami, and Hamilton himself, will be important. It will be important that the driver is warned in time, that he has an opponent behind him that he must let pass, that in his good lap, otherwise he risks a penalty on the grid and therefore for the impeding. So pay attention to this factor here, because here in Jeddah, anything can happen. There are accidents, red flags. Also be careful to do the lap in time, because there can be the red flag and also the impeding, because they are all blind curves in the end. So these are two very important aspects to consider even when you want to make the time in qualifying. It's true that doing it at the end of the session, you have advantages in terms of certainly how rubberized the track is, how much cleaner it is, etc., etc. But it's also disadvantages, because you can catch a red flag or you can catch an impeding and not complete the lap, and therefore maybe be excluded from the session. So pay attention to all these factors, which will then affect. Here we see exactly how Norris manages to attack the curb in turn 1 and also make the change of direction. Then for turn 2, very quickly attack the curb in turn 2, while Leclerc, doing the same thing, suffers a bit from a very rigid suspension. In fact, Ferrari, I saw a suspension more rigid compared to the opponents, and this also causes a problem when it goes to attack the curbs, that there are few to take in Jeddah, because In the end, there are in the first sector, maybe also something in the second, but not very much. And when you go over a curb and it's too rigid, a setup coming down from the curb, you have the problem that Red Bull had last year, namely a car that loses stability and therefore also loses performance because you don't feel the grip of the single-seater and it lightens the gas. So this is another problem that Ferrari has at this moment that it must obviously solve with the setup and with the balance of the car. This difference between the various drivers without drag reduction system, in this case without drag reduction system, we see that McLaren is even faster than Red Bull and Ferrari. With drag reduction system instead, it is a slower car. This means that anyway, McLaren has a good efficiency to a drag reduction system, not so efficient compared to the opponents. This is very interesting as a graphic. It shows us this final part here. And Ferrari, if we want, has the lock is less efficient compared to the opponents. This also certainly affects when you are in the race, on the race pace, etc., etc. In the comments, share your expectations for the Jeddah qualifications and race. What are your thoughts on the team's free trials? How do you see Ferrari performing? Leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Check out the related videos. See you next time!